Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues and administrators. I want to thank you for your time today, and I promise not to take a lot of it. As one of your infectious disease epidemiologists, my team and I have discovered a new infectious disease, the Amorte disease. And I want to talk a little bit today about an alternative to the lab that we currently have for accurately diagnosing this disease. So just very briefly, the Amorte disease is one that if it is untreated or misdiagnosed, it can very rapidly progress to heart failure and even death. And what we have found that this is even within a year. So this really lends the urgency for practitioners and the medical staff to mitigate the morbidity and mortality of Amorte disease. Now, most of you know, or if you're not familiar yet, the current diagnostic test requires IV contrast dye, and that is contraindicated for many of our patients. Many of them have allergies to the dye, and so they're not able to tolerate it. So what we have discovered is a very simple, inexpensive lab test, the Liebken lab test. It can be administered at any time of day, so it is not time sensitive, and it doesn't require our patients to fast. So this gives us plenty of opportunities to accurately diagnose our patients once we see them either in specialty care or primary care. Now, what my team and I have gathered for you today during this briefing is our latest population-based sample of 10,000 patients, and what we wanted to gather were some very specific bits of information about the sensitivity of the test, the specificity, as well as the negative and positive predictive values, so that you can discuss it with your patients and give them some really good information from what we've gathered so far. So the simple 2x2 chart that I have for you shows that we did a total, like I mentioned, 10,000 patients in this population-based sample. Of those, 1,400 actually were had the presence of disease, and in contrast, 8,600 did not. So this gave us a prevalence of 14% on disease. Now, we also did the positive and negative testing, and we're going to go over those specifics on the next slide. So I'll keep this up on the slide board for you if you want to follow along with me. But what do numbers tell us about this specific test? As I mentioned, the prevalence is 14% in that sample population we did. The sensitivity, a lot of people want to know about sensitivity and specificity. So sensitivity, that really is our true positives. For those who test positive, actually having the disease present. So on the top row on the 2x2 table, that gave us 1,274 positive tests out of a total of 1,400 with disease. So that sensitivity was 91%. Now the specificity, those are the true negatives. And what specificity actually tells us is of those that have a negative test, the probability that they don't have the disease. Now we do have to take into account all of the false positives, which as you can see, 1,357 of those who tested had a negative test out of 8,600. So that's a good number of false positives. So our specificity was only 16%. However, I do want to take your, actually have your attention drawn to what did we find with the positive predictive value of this test? And what's the negative predictive value? So those probabilities let us know what's the probability that that test actually says what it does what it says rather. So of those 1,274 positive tests, there was a total of 8,517 that were positive. 1,274 actually had the disease present. So that gave us a positive predictive value of 15%. But take into account, just like with our specificity, there were a good number of false positives that showed up. What I would like you to pay attention to, though, is the negative predictive value. That is, of those who test negative, how many actually are negative for the disease process? And this is much better. 1,357 negative tests out of 1,483 negative gave us a negative predictive value of 91%. So 9 out of 10 patients with a negative test for the disease actually are negative. I'm opening it up to questions, but I want to leave you with a couple quotes. So Plato was one of the first ones who mentioned strange names for diseases, and you may think that is quite appropriate for today's visit. But he also was attributed to saying that love is a serious mental disease, and to that I say thank goodness for mental health. Thank you again, and let's